During a trip with his chauffeur, the millionaire froze when he saw his watch, the same one his son wore when he disappeared many years ago. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of Michael Carter's sleek black sedan as it cruised down the highway. He stared out at the blurred landscape, lost in thoughts that had become all too familiar over the past 20 years. The rhythmic tapping of the rain, usually soothing, did nothing to ease the ache in his chest, a dull, constant reminder of the day his life had shattered. It had been a day much like this one, dark and rainy, when Lucas had vanished. Michael could still remember the panic that had gripped him when he realized his son was gone. The search that followed was exhaustive and desperate, but ultimately fruitless. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, yet the pain never lessened. The memory of Lucas, his bright smile and boundless energy, was all that kept Michael going, even as the years passed and hope faded. Today was just another day, another trip to another business meeting that, in the grand scheme of things, felt meaningless. But as his eyes drifted over to Jake, the young driver he'd hired for the trip, something caught his attention. It was a simple thing, something most people wouldn't notice, but Michael's breath caught in his throat. On Jake's wrist was a watch that was identical to the one Lucas had worn the day he disappeared. Michael leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the watch. "Jake," he began, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of tension. "Where did you get that watch?" Jake glanced at him in the rearview mirror, a bit puzzled by the sudden question. "Oh, this. I bought it from a pawn shop a few towns over," he replied casually, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. But to Michael, it was anything but ordinary. His mind raced, and his heart pounded in his chest as memories of Lucas flooded back. How he had picked out that very watch as a gift for his son's 10th birthday. It had been Lucas's favorite possession, something he wore every day until the day he disappeared. "Do you remember the name of the pawn shop?" Michael pressed, trying to keep his voice steady. Jake frowned, thinking for a moment. "Yeah, I think it was called Old Town Pawn, out near Ravenwood. Why?" "Is something wrong, Mr. Carter?" Michael forced a smile, trying to mask the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "No, nothing's wrong. I was just curious. It looks like an old watch." Jake nodded, turning his attention back to the road. But Michael couldn't let it go. The watch wasn't just old. It was a relic from a past that Michael had never been able to put behind him. As they drove on, the rain falling heavier now, Michael knew what he had to do. He couldn't ignore this. After 20 years of searching for answers, this was the closest he'd ever come to finding out what happened to Lucas. "Jake," Michael said after a few moments of silence, his voice firm, "I need you to take me to that pawn shop. Now." Jake hesitated, glancing back at Michael in the mirror. "Are you sure? We're going to be late for your meeting." "The meeting can wait," Michael replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is more important." Jake, sensing the urgency in Michael's voice, nodded and changed lanes, heading toward the small town of Ravenwood. The rain continued to pour, the sky darkening as they drove deeper into the countryside. Michael sat back, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Could this really be happening? Could he finally be on the brink of discovering what happened to his son after all these years? As they neared the town, Michael's determination grew. He had spent 2 decades living with the pain of not knowing, and now, finally, there was a chance, no matter how small, that he might uncover the truth. He wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. The car slowed as they entered Ravenwood, a quiet, almost forgotten town nestled between rolling hills. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where memories lingered in the shadows. Michael's eyes scanned the streets, searching for the pawn shop. Finally, they spotted it. Old Town Pawn, the sign creaking in the wind as they pulled up to the curb. Michael's heart raced as he stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through his coat almost instantly. He barely noticed. All he could think about was the watch on Jake's wrist and the possibility that, after all these years, he might finally have a lead. With a deep breath, he pushed open the door to the shop, the bell above it jangling softly. The inside was dimly lit, with shelves lined with trinkets and treasures from another time. Michael's eyes scanned the room, landing on the elderly man behind the counter. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Michael stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I need to know about a watch that my driver bought here. It's very important." The man raised an eyebrow but nodded, sensing the gravity in Michael's tone. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's see what we can find out." As the man began searching through his records, Michael couldn't help but feel that, finally, the answers he'd been searching for all these years were within reach. The small bell above the door jingled again as Michael stepped further into the pawn shop. The musty smell of old wood and forgotten belongings filled the air, mixing with the sound of raindrops pattering against the windows. Michael's gaze followed the old man's movements as he rifled through a pile of ledgers behind the counter. Jake, sensing the tension in the room, shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Mr. Carter, are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Michael turned to him, his expression resolute. "Jake, I've spent the last 20 years wondering what happened to my son. This watch might be the first real clue I've had in all that time. I need to know where it came from." Jake nodded, though he still seemed unsure. Michael understood his hesitation. This was hardly the kind of thing a young driver would expect to be involved in on a routine business trip. But for Michael, this was far from routine. It was a chance to finally find answers, to close the chapter of his life that had been left agonizingly open. The old man cleared his throat, pulling Michael's attention back to the counter. "Found it," he said, tapping a page in the ledger with a gnarled finger. "The watch was sold to me a few months ago, by a guy from out of town. Said he found it in an abandoned house not far from here." Michael's pulse quickened. "Do you remember where this house is?" The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's about a mile out of town, off the main road. Place has been empty for years, ever since the last owner passed. Not much to see out there anymore, just a lot of dust and old memories." "I need to go there," Michael said, determination lacing his words. "Can you give me directions?" The old man scratched his chin, eyeing Michael with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Sure, I can give you directions, but I've got to warn you, it's not exactly a place people like to visit. Locals say it's haunted, though I think it's just the wind blowing through the old walls." Michael nodded, unfazed by the warning. Ghosts didn't scare him. He had been haunted by his own demons for 2 decades. "That's fine," he said. "Just tell me how to get there." The old man gave him a long look before scribbling down the directions on a scrap of paper. "Here you go," he said, handing it to Michael. "Be careful out there." Michael took the paper, feeling a sense of urgency swell within him. "Thank you," he said, turning to leave. As they stepped back into the rain, Jake glanced over at Michael, concern evident in his eyes. "Mr. Carter, are you sure about this? What if there's nothing out there?" Michael paused, his hand resting on the car door. He looked at Jake, seeing not just a driver, but a young man caught up in something far bigger than himself. "I don't know what we'll find," Michael admitted. "But I can't let this go. If there's even a chance that this watch is connected to Lucas, I have to follow it. I have to know." Jake hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." The drive to the abandoned house was silent, the only sound the relentless drumming of the rain on the car roof. The road wound through thick woods, the trees growing denser the further they went. Michael's mind raced with possibilities. What if they found something? What if this really was the key to uncovering what happened to Lucas? As they turned onto a narrow dirt road, the house came into view. It was a crumbling 2-story structure, its windows boarded up and its paint peeling in long, jagged strips. The front yard was overgrown, the grass tall and wild, as if nature itself had begun to reclaim the land. Jake parked the car and they both sat in silence for a moment, staring at the house. "This place gives me the creeps," Jake muttered, breaking the silence. Michael couldn't disagree. The house exuded an eerie, almost malevolent energy, but he pushed the feeling aside. He had come this far. He couldn't back down now. "Let's go," he said, opening the car door and stepping into the rain. They approached the house cautiously, the wet grass brushing against their legs. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking as it swayed in the wind. Michael pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The smell of decay was stronger inside, mixed with the scent of damp wood and something else, something Michael couldn't quite place. Jake turned on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Where do we start?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's look around," Michael replied, stepping further into the house. The floorboards creaked underfoot, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. Dust hung in the air, thick and undisturbed, as if no one had set foot in the house for years. They moved cautiously from room to room, finding little more than broken furniture and faded wallpaper. But then, in what appeared to be the living room, something caught Michael's eye. A pile of papers and photographs lay scattered across a table, half covered in dust. He sifted through them, his heart pounding as he realized what he was looking at. Documents that seemed to be connected to the old orphanage that had once operated in the town, and photographs of children who had passed through its doors. And then he saw it. A photograph of a boy, around 10 years old, with a face that Michael would have recognized anywhere. It was Lucas. He stared at the photograph, his hands trembling. "Jake, look at this," he said, his voice hoarse. Jake leaned over, his eyes widening as he took in the photograph. "That's him, isn't it? That's Lucas." Michael nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the image. "He was here," he whispered. "Lucas was here." A surge of emotion threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to stay focused. This was it. This was the lead he had been searching for. But it was only the beginning. There was more to uncover, and Michael knew that the answers he sought might not be easy to find. But he was prepared to go to any lengths to uncover the truth. The photograph of Lucas was like a punch to Michael's gut, a sudden, undeniable confirmation that his son had indeed been here, in this very house. He felt a mix of emotions, relief, fear, anger, all swirling together, making it difficult to think clearly. But there was no time to get lost in feelings now. He needed to stay sharp, to follow the trail before it went cold again. Jake hovered nearby, the beam of his flashlight jittering slightly, a reflection of his own nervousness. "What do we do now, Mr. Carter?" he asked, his voice low. Michael didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes on the photograph, tracing the familiar features of his son. Lucas's face was thinner than he remembered, his expression more solemn, but there was no mistaking it. It was him. He finally looked up at Jake, determination hardening his expression. "We keep looking. There has to be more here." They continued to search the house, carefully sifting through the piles of papers and documents that had been left behind. The house was a treasure trove of old, forgotten things that most people would consider junk. But that might hold the key to unlocking the mystery of what had happened to Lucas. In the kitchen, they found a stack of newspapers, yellowed and brittle with age. Michael rifled through them, his eyes scanning the headlines. Most of the news was mundane, but one article stood out. A report from the early 1990s about a sudden spike in missing children in the area. The article was vague, but it mentioned several children who had vanished without a trace, and the suspicions that had begun to grow about a possible trafficking ring operating in the region. Michael's heart raced as he read the article. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm that there had been something sinister going on here, and Lucas had somehow gotten caught up in it. Jake, who had been searching the living room, suddenly called out, "Mr. Carter, you need to see this." Michael hurried into the room, where Jake was holding a small, battered journal. "I found this hidden behind one of the floorboards," Jake explained, handing it to Michael. "Looks like it belonged to someone who lived here. Maybe it can tell us more." Michael took the journal, his fingers brushing over the worn leather cover. It was fragile. The pages yellowed and cracked at the edges, but it was clear that someone had taken great care to hide it. He opened it carefully, the pages stiff and brittle as they turned. The journal was written in a neat, careful hand, the ink faded but still legible. It began as the diary of a man, perhaps the former owner of the house, who had lived here years ago. At first, the entries were mundane, detailing the daily life of a small-town resident. But as Michael read on, the tone of the entries began to change. The writer spoke of strangers coming to town, asking questions about children, offering money for information. Michael's breath caught as he reached a passage that mentioned a particular incident. The writer had seen a group of men loading children into a van late one night. The writer had tried to intervene, but he was threatened and told to keep quiet if he valued his life. The men took the children, and the writer never saw them again. The final entries in the journal were more frantic, filled with fear and regret. The writer mentioned seeing the van again and hearing rumors of an orphanage nearby that had been involved in some sort of illegal activity. The last entry was particularly chilling. "I tried to do something. I failed. They took the boy. I think his name was Lucas." Michael's hand trembled as he closed the journal. This was it. This was the confirmation he had feared, but also desperately needed. Lucas had been taken, and whoever had done it had connections to this town, to this orphanage. He looked at Jake, who was watching him with wide eyes. "We have to find this orphanage," Michael said, his voice firm. "That's where they took him." Jake nodded, clearly shaken by what they had discovered. "I'll help you find it, Mr. Carter, whatever it takes." They left the house, the rain still pouring down, and got back into the car. Michael's mind was racing. The pieces were starting to fit together, but there were still so many unanswered questions. How had Lucas ended up at the orphanage? And what had happened to him after that? The drive back to town was tense, both men silent as they processed what they had uncovered. Michael's grip on the steering wheel tightened as they neared the town center. He had a new lead now, but he also knew that following it would take him into even darker territory. As they pulled into the town, Michael took out his phone and began searching for any information on the orphanage mentioned in the journal. It took a few tries, but he finally found something, a small, obscure article from a local newspaper, mentioning the closing of an orphanage near Ravenwood in the early 90s. The article was brief, but it mentioned that the orphanage had been shut down due to allegations of misconduct. "This is it," Michael muttered to himself. "This is where we need to go next." Jake looked over at him. "Where to?" Michael took a deep breath, the weight of what they were about to do settling over him. "We're going to the orphanage," he said, "and we're going to find out what happened to my son." The car started moving again, the rain-soaked roads leading them toward the next chapter of their investigation. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and determination driving him forward. The darkness of the past was closing in, but he was ready to face it, no matter what he found. The journey was far from over. But Michael knew one thing for certain. He was getting closer to the truth, and nothing would stop him now. The old orphanage loomed ahead, a hulking, decaying structure that had clearly seen better days. Michael parked the car at the edge of the overgrown lot, the remnants of what once might have been a playground barely visible through the dense vegetation. The building itself was a grim sight, its windows boarded up, the roof sagging in places, and ivy crawling up the walls as if nature was slowly reclaiming it. "This place looks like it's been abandoned for decades," Jake remarked, his voice tinged with unease as he looked at the dilapidated structure. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the orphanage. "It has been," he replied, "but there are answers inside. I can feel it." They stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel under their feet, the only sound breaking the eerie silence that hung over the place. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air was still thick with moisture, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Michael's mind raced as he tried to prepare himself for whatever they might find inside. The front door of the orphanage was slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on its rusted hinges. Michael pushed it open with a loud creak, revealing a dark and musty interior. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of rot and decay, and every step they took stirred up clouds of dust that danced in the weak shafts of light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. They moved through the entryway and into what must have once been a common area. Broken furniture was strewn about, and the walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti. Michael could almost imagine the orphanage in its prime, children running through the halls, the sound of laughter echoing through the rooms. But those days were long gone, replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. "Where do we start?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael scanned the room, his eyes lingering on a set of double doors at the far end of the hallway. "Let's check the records room," he suggested. "If there are any files or documents left, they might be in there." They made their way down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The records room was just as dilapidated as the rest of the orphanage, but it was clear that it had once been the administrative hub of the place. Filing cabinets lined the walls, many of them overturned or broken open, their contents scattered across the floor. A large desk sat in the center of the room, covered in a thick layer of dust. Michael approached one of the filing cabinets, his heart pounding in his chest as he pulled open the rusted drawer. Inside, he found stacks of old papers and files, their edges yellowed with age. He began to sift through them, searching for anything that might give him a clue about Lucas's time here. Jake moved to another cabinet, doing the same. They worked in silence, the only sound the rustling of paper and the occasional creak of the old building settling around them. Michael's hands were trembling slightly as he flipped through file after file, each one seeming to lead nowhere. But he refused to give up. He had come too far to turn back now. And then, finally, he found something. "Jake," Michael called out, his voice tinged with urgency. "I think I found something." Jake hurried over, and Michael showed him the file he had just pulled from the drawer. It was a thin, worn folder with the name Lucas Carter scrawled across the top in faded ink. Michael's heart skipped a beat as he opened it, revealing a few sparse documents inside. The first was a basic intake form, listing Lucas's name, age, and a brief description of his appearance. The date of intake was several weeks after Lucas had disappeared, confirming that he had indeed been brought here shortly after he was taken. The second document was a brief medical report, noting that Lucas had been in generally good health, though he had appeared malnourished when he arrived. But it was the final document that made Michael's blood run cold. It was a transfer form, indicating that Lucas had been adopted by a family in Europe. There was no name listed for the adoptive family, only a vague reference to a private arrangement that had been made through an intermediary. "They sent him to Europe," Michael murmured, his eyes scanning the document over and over as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Do you think he's still there?" Jake asked, leaning over to get a better look at the file. Michael clenched his jaw, the implications of what he was reading hitting him hard. Lucas had been taken halfway across the world, given a new identity, a new life, without any knowledge of who he really was. And all of it had been done in secret, with no regard for the family that had been left behind. "I don't know," Michael admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "But this is the first real lead we've had. We need to find out who arranged this adoption, and where Richard is now." They searched the rest of the room for more information, but the records were sparse, most of them incomplete or missing altogether. It was clear that whoever had been running this operation had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. But Michael had what he needed: a name, a place, and a direction to move in. As they left the orphanage, the drizzle had stopped, and the sky was beginning to clear. The oppressive weight that had hung over the place seemed to lift slightly, though the shadows of the past still lingered in Michael's mind. He felt a renewed sense of determination, He was getting closer, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Back in the car, Michael pulled out his phone and began making calls, contacting every connection he had in Europe to help him trace the adoption. He needed to move quickly. Every moment that passed was another moment that Lucas, now Richard, lived without knowing the truth. As they drove away from the orphanage, Michael couldn't help but glance back at the decaying building in the rearview mirror. It had held so many secrets, so much pain, and yet it had also given him the key to finding his son. The truth was beginning to emerge, and Michael was determined to see it through to the end. He had lost too much time already. He wouldn't lose any more. The plane's engines roared as it lifted off from the runway, the city of New York quickly shrinking beneath the clouds. Michael sat in his first-class seat, staring out of the window but barely noticing the view. His mind was elsewhere, thousands of miles away in Europe, where he hoped to finally find his son. Next to him, Jake was flipping through a travel magazine, trying to distract himself from the tension that had been building since they left the orphanage. He could sense the weight of the journey ahead, but he remained steadfast in his commitment to help Michael, no matter how daunting the task might seem. Michael's phone buzzed in his hand, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen, an email from one of the private investigators he had hired to trace the adoption records in Europe. With a quick tap, he opened the message, his heart pounding as he read the details. The investigator had found a lead. A family in Switzerland had adopted a boy matching Lucas's description around the same time indicated in the orphanage records. The boy, renamed Richard, had been raised in a small town nestled in the Swiss Alps, far from the bustling cities where he might have been recognized. The email included the family's address and a few notes about their background. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. This was it. Richard was in Switzerland, and for the first time in 20 years, Michael felt like he was close enough to reach out and touch his son. But with that closeness came a new wave of fear. How would Richard react to learning the truth? Would he even want to meet the father he never knew he had? "Is that the information we've been waiting for?" Jake asked, noticing the intensity on Michael's face. Michael nodded, handing the phone to Jake so he could read the email. "He's in Switzerland. We have an address. It's a small town. Isolated. Perfect for keeping him hidden." Jake skimmed the email, then looked up at Michael. "Do you think he knows? About who he really is?" "I don't know," Michael replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But we're going to find out." The rest of the flight passed in a tense silence, both men lost in their own thoughts. For Michael, the hours felt like days, every second stretching as his mind played out 1,000 different scenarios. He tried to prepare himself for what was to come, but no amount of mental rehearsal could truly ready him for the moment he would finally see his son again. When the plane touched down in Zurich, they wasted no time. Michael had arranged for a car to take them straight to the small town where Richard lived. As they drove through the picturesque countryside, with its rolling hills and quaint villages, the reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a business trip or an investigation. This was the culmination of 2 decades of pain, searching, and hoping against hope. The town itself was like something out of a postcard, nestled in a valley with snow-capped mountains towering on all sides. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with charming houses and small shops. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where secrets could be kept, but not forever. The car pulled up in front of a modest chalet with a neatly kept garden. Michael's heart raced as he stared at the house, trying to imagine what it had been like for Richard to grow up here, far away from the life he had once known. He glanced at Jake, who gave him a reassuring nod. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, though the question felt more rhetorical than anything else. Michael took a deep breath, his hand resting on the door handle. "I don't think I'll ever be ready," he admitted, "but I have to do this." They stepped out of the car, the crisp mountain air biting at their faces as they approached the front door. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he reached up to knock, the sound echoing in the quiet of the late afternoon. There was a brief pause, then the door opened, revealing a woman in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her accent thick but her English clear. Michael hesitated for a moment, the words caught in his throat. How could he explain what he was here for? How could he tell this woman that the boy she had raised as her son was actually his long-lost child? "I'm sorry to intrude," Michael began, his voice wavering slightly. "My name is Michael Carter. I'm looking for someone named Richard. I believe he lives here." The woman's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Richard? Yes, he's my son. Is something wrong?" Michael took another deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I need to speak with him. It's about something very important, about his past." The woman's expression grew more guarded, but she nodded slowly. "Please, come in. I'll get him." They stepped into the chalet, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the chill outside. The house was cozy and inviting, filled with the smells of freshly baked bread and the faint scent of pine. It was the kind of home that felt lived in, where love and care had clearly gone into every detail. As they waited in the living room, Michael's nerves began to fray. This was it, the moment he had been both dreading and yearning for. Every second felt like an eternity as he listened to the sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. Finally, the door opened, and a young man stepped into the room. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features that were unmistakably similar to Michael's own. But it was his eyes that struck Michael the most. Eyes that were so familiar, yet filled with a life Michael had never been a part of. "Richard," Michael breathed, his heart pounding in his chest. The young man looked at him, confusion and curiosity mingling in his gaze. "Yes, I'm Richard," he replied, his voice steady but cautious. "Who are you?" Michael took a step forward, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I'm your father, Richard. Your real father." Richard's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words coming out. The room seemed to close in around them, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Michael knew that this was just the beginning. There would be questions, anger, perhaps even denial. But for now, all that mattered was that they had found each other. The truth was out, and there was no going back. They were finally face to face after all these years. The silence in the room was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken words and emotions too complex to express. Richard stood frozen, his eyes locked on Michael, who was struggling to maintain his composure. This was the moment he had waited for, feared, dreamed of, and now that it was here, it felt surreal. I don't understand," Richard finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean you're my father?" Michael stepped forward, his heart aching with the knowledge of how much Richard didn't know. "It's a long story, Richard. One I never imagined I'd have to tell like this. But I need you to hear me out." The older woman, who Michael now realized must be Richard's adoptive mother, stood quietly by the doorway, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. She hadn't interrupted, but it was clear she was grappling with the sudden intrusion into their lives. "Please, sit down," Michael urged, his voice gentle but firm. "There's so much you need to know." Richard hesitated, glancing at his mother, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Reluctantly, he moved to the sofa and sat down, his posture stiff, every muscle in his body tense. Michael took a seat opposite him, feeling the immense weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I know this is a lot to take in," Michael began, searching for the right words. "But 20 years ago, you were taken from me. Your name was Lucas, and you were my son. We lived in New York. You were just 10 years old when you disappeared." Richard's brow furrowed as he tried to process what he was hearing. "But my name is Richard. I've always been Richard. I grew up here, in Switzerland. How can what you're saying be true?" Michael reached into his pocket, pulling out the photograph he had found at the orphanage. He handed it to Richard, watching as the young man's eyes widened in recognition. "This is you," Michael said quietly. "This is Lucas. That's the name you had before you were brought here, before you were given a new life." Richard stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. The image was old, faded around the edges, but there was no denying the resemblance. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. Yet the boy in the picture felt like a stranger. "I don't remember any of this," Richard whispered, his voice laced with uncertainty. "How can this be real? How can I be this Lucas you're talking about?" Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You were very young when it happened, and traumatic experiences can sometimes cause memories to be repressed. But everything I've told you is the truth. I've spent the last 20 years searching for you, trying to find out what happened. And now I found you." Richard's adoptive mother finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Richard, you know I love you, and I've always tried to be the best mother I could be for you. But I didn't know the full truth about your past. We were told you were an orphan, that you had no family. I didn't know you had a father looking for you." Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions: confusion, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. "Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head. "I didn't know, Richard. I swear I didn't know. If I had, things might have been different. But you have to understand. We wanted to give you a loving home, a family. We never imagined there was someone out there searching for you." The room fell into a heavy silence once more, the reality of the situation sinking in. Richard's world had been turned upside down in the span of a few minutes, and the man sitting across from him, this stranger who claimed to be his father, was at the center of it all. Richard turned his attention back to Michael, his voice trembling as he spoke. "If what you're saying is true, then why did this happen? Why was I taken from you?" Michael's jaw tightened, the anger and pain he had tried to suppress bubbling to the surface. "It's a long and complicated story, Richard. There were people who didn't want us to be together, who had their own selfish reasons for keeping us apart. But I promise you, I never stopped looking for you, not for a single day." Richard studied Michael's face, searching for any hint of deception, but all he saw was the raw, unfiltered emotion of a man who had suffered deeply. It was impossible to ignore the sincerity in his words, the desperation to reconnect with a son he had lost so long ago. "I don't know what to say," Richard admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "This is also overwhelming." Michael reached out, placing a hand on Richard's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything right now. I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm not expecting you to just accept it all at once. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm ready to answer any questions you have, whenever you're ready to ask them." Richard looked down at the photograph again, the image of Lucas, of himself, staring back at him. His thoughts were a chaotic mess, tangled in a web of disbelief, fear, and a faint glimmer of hope. He had always felt like something was missing in his life, a void he could never quite fill. And now he was beginning to understand why. "I need time to think," Richard finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Take all the time you need," Michael replied softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Richard nodded, his gaze distant as he tried to make sense of everything. He stood up slowly, still clutching the photograph, and left the room without another word, retreating to the solitude of his thoughts. Michael watched him go, his heart aching with the realization that this reunion, while long awaited, was only the beginning of a much more difficult journey. He had found his son, but now came the hardest part: rebuilding a relationship that had been shattered by time and circumstance. As the door closed behind Richard, Michael felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see Richard's adoptive mother standing beside him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and sorrow. "Thank you for coming all this way," she said quietly. "I know this isn't easy for any of us, but I believe it's important that Richard knows the truth." Michael nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I've waited 20 years for this moment. I just hope..." I hope he'll be able to forgive me for not finding him sooner." She squeezed his arm gently, offering what comfort she could. "Give him time. This is a lot for him to process. But I can see that you care about him deeply. And that's what matters." Michael managed a faint smile, though the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on his shoulders. "I just want what's best for him. I always have." She nodded, releasing his arm. "I believe you, and I think, in time, he will too." With that, she left the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. He had found his son, but the path to rebuilding their relationship was uncertain and fraught with challenges. But for now, all he could do was wait and hope that the bond they had once shared could be rekindled. For the first time in 20 years, Michael had hope. And that was enough to keep him going. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Michael remained in the small Swiss town, staying at a nearby inn as he waited for Richard to process everything. He respected Richard's need for space, knowing that forcing the issue would only push his son further away. But the waiting was agonizing. Each morning, Michael would take a walk through the town, trying to keep his mind occupied. The town's beauty, with its cobblestone streets and picturesque views of the mountains, did little to ease the turmoil inside him. His thoughts were consumed with Richard, with the years they had lost, and with the dark truths he had yet to uncover. Jake stayed close by, offering support in his quiet, steadfast way. They talked often, discussing the next steps, but there was an unspoken understanding that the situation was delicate. Michael knew he couldn't rush Richard, but the urgency to uncover the full truth gnawed at him. One afternoon, as Michael was returning from a walk, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, a message from one of the private investigators he had hired back in New York. The subject line made his heart skip a beat: new information on Lucas's disappearance. With trembling hands, Michael opened the message. The investigator had uncovered something shocking: evidence linking Emma, Michael's ex-wife and Richard's stepmother, to the group responsible for Lucas's abduction. The details were sparse, but it was clear that Emma had played a far more sinister role in the events of the past than Michael had ever imagined. He read the message twice, then a third time, as the words slowly sank in. Emma hadn't just been complicit, she had been directly involved in orchestrating Lucas's abduction. The revelation hit Michael like a punch to the gut, leaving him reeling. Emma had always been cold, distant even, but Michael had never suspected her of something so monstrous. The betrayal cut deep, reopening old wounds that had never fully healed. He thought back to their marriage, to the years they had spent together, and now all those memories felt tainted, corrupted by the knowledge of what she had done. "Mr. Carter?" Jake's voice pulled Michael from his thoughts. He looked up to see Jake standing nearby, concern etched on his face. "Is everything all right?" Michael shook his head, the shock still evident in his expression. "No, Jake, it's not all right. I just got some information. Something I never expected." Jake moved closer, lowering his voice. "What is it?" Michael handed him the phone, letting Jake read the message for himself. He watched as Jake's eyes widened, his expression shifting from surprise to anger. "Emma was involved?" Jake said, disbelief lacing his words. "How could she?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling over. "I don't know. I never would have guessed she was capable of something like this. But it makes sense now, doesn't it? The way she always insisted on keeping things quiet, the way she distanced herself from Lucas after he was gone." Jake nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. "It explains a lot, but what do we do now?" Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We need to confront her. She's in New York, still living her life like nothing ever happened. But now that we know the truth, we can't just let her get away with it." "But what about Richard?" Jake asked, concern evident in his voice. "How do we tell him something like this?" Michael's heart ached at the thought. Richard was already struggling to come to terms with the truth about his past. And now this. It was almost too much to bear. but Michael knew they couldn't keep it from him. Not if they wanted to move forward. "We'll have to tell him," Michael said, his voice firm despite the pain. "He deserves to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts. And we'll need his help if we're going to confront Emma. This isn't something we can do alone." Jake nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "I just hope he can handle it. This is a lot to put on someone all at once." Michael could only nod in agreement. He knew Jake was right, but they had no choice. The truth was out, and it was time to face it head-on. Later that evening, Michael sat in his room at the inn, staring out the window at the snow-capped mountains in the distance. The beauty of the scene was lost on him, overshadowed by the storm brewing inside. He had spent so many years searching for answers, and now that he had them, they felt like a double-edged sword, bringing him closer to his son, but also revealing a darkness he hadn't anticipated. As he sat there, lost in thought, there was a knock on the door. Michael's heart leaped, hoping it was Richard. He crossed the room quickly, opening the door to find his son standing there, his expression unreadable. "Richard," Michael said, his voice a mix of relief and apprehension. "Come in." Richard stepped inside, his movements slow, almost hesitant. He looked around the room briefly before settling his gaze on Michael. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone measured, "about everything you told me, about who I really am." Michael nodded, sensing that this was the moment he had been waiting for. "I know it's a lot to process. I can't imagine how you're feeling right now." Richard's eyes flashed with a mixture of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness. "I don't know how to feel," he admitted. "But I do know that I want answers. I want to understand what happened and why." Michael felt a surge of hope. "That's what I want too, Richard. And I think we can find those answers together. But there's something else you need to know. Something I just found out." Richard frowned, clearly bracing himself for more bad news. "What is it?" Michael hesitated, not wanting to burden his son any more than he already had, but he knew he couldn't hold back. "I've discovered that Emma, your stepmother, was involved in your abduction. She played a role in taking you away from me." Richard's face paled, the color draining from his cheeks as the shock of Michael's words hit him. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. How could she do that?" "I don't have all the details yet," Michael replied gently, "but I've hired investigators who are piecing it together. What I do know is that she was directly involved in making sure you were taken and sent away. I'm so sorry, Richard. I never imagined she could be capable of something like this." Richard staggered back, as if the revelation had physically struck him. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. All this time, I thought she was just cold, distant. I never thought she... Michael moved to his side, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know this is hard to hear, but we need to confront her. We need to get the full truth. And she's the only one who can give it to us." Richard looked up, his eyes burning with a mix of betrayal and determination. "You're right. We need to confront her. I need to know why she did this to me. To us." Michael nodded, feeling a deep sense of resolve settling over him. "Then we'll do it together. We'll go back to New York and we'll make sure she faces the consequences of what she's done." The room fell silent, the gravity of their decision hanging in the air. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with painful revelations and confrontations, but Michael knew they had no choice. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. As they prepared to leave, Michael felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone in his search for answers. He had his son by his side, and together, they would face the past, no matter how treacherous it might be. The flight back to New York was heavy with anticipation. Michael and Richard sat side by side, the silence between them thick with unspoken thoughts. Both were bracing themselves for the confrontation that awaited them, the weight of their shared past pressing down on them like a leaden cloud. Michael kept glancing at his son, studying the lines of his face, the sharp jawline, the furrowed brow, the tension in his posture. He looked so much like the boy Michael had lost, yet he was also a stranger, a young man shaped by experiences Michael could never have been a part of. The years apart had created a chasm, but Michael was determined to bridge it, no matter how painful the process. As they approached the city, the familiar skyline coming into view, Michael felt his heart rate increase. He had thought about this moment for years, but now that it was here, the reality of confronting Emma, of finally getting the answers he had been searching for, felt daunting. He had prepared himself for anything, but the stakes had never been higher. When they landed, Jake was waiting for them, ready to drive them straight to Emma's apartment. The tension in the car was palpable. Each man lost in his own thoughts as they navigated the bustling streets of New York. The city that never slept seemed eerily quiet to Michael, as if it too was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. They arrived at Emma's building, a sleek, modern high-rise in one of Manhattan's most exclusive neighborhoods. Michael had paid for this apartment, just as he had paid for so many other things during their marriage, never imagining the betrayal that had been lurking beneath the surface. "Are you ready?" Michael asked Richard as they stood outside the building, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Richard nodded, his jaw set in determination. "I need to hear it from her. I need to know why she did this." Michael placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "We'll get the truth, together." They entered the building, the doorman giving them a polite nod as they made their way to the elevator. The ride up felt interminable, the silence between them heavy with anticipation. When the doors finally opened on Emma's floor, Michael felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. They walked down the hallway, the plush carpet muffling their footsteps. Michael hesitated for a brief moment outside Emma's door, then knocked, the sound echoing through the quiet corridor. There was a pause, then the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the other side. The door opened, and there she was, Emma, looking as poised and elegant as ever, her expression one of mild surprise. But there was something else in her eyes, something that flickered for just a moment before she masked it. Fear. "Michael," she said, her voice cool but tinged with unease. "What are you doing here? And who—" Her gaze shifted to Richard, and she froze. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by a fleeting look of panic that she quickly tried to hide. But it was too late. Michael had seen it, and so had Richard. "We need to talk, Emma," Michael said, his voice steady but with an edge that left no room for argument. "Now." Emma's eyes darted between Michael and Richard, and for a moment, it looked as though she might slam the door in their faces. But she seemed to realize that there was no escape, no avoiding the confrontation that had been brewing for so many years. She stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The apartment was as immaculate as Michael remembered, tastefully decorated, every piece of furniture perfectly placed. But the cold, impersonal atmosphere only served to remind him of the emotional distance that had always existed between them. They moved into the living room, the tension thickening with each passing second. Emma remained standing, her arms crossed defensively, while Michael and Richard took seats on the sofa. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of a nearby clock. "What is this about, Michael?" Emma finally asked, her tone clipped. "Why have you brought him here?" Michael exchanged a glance with Richard, who nodded slightly, giving him the go-ahead to speak. "We know, Emma," Michael said, his voice firm. "We know what you did. We know about your involvement in Richard's abduction." Emma's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks. She opened her mouth to deny it, but no words came out. For a moment, she seemed at a loss, her usual composure slipping. Then, she quickly regained her footing, her expression hardening. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Don't lie to me, Emma," Michael snapped, his anger finally bubbling to the surface. "We have the evidence. We know you were involved with the people who took Richard. We know you played a part in separating us." Emma's eyes flashed with anger, her defenses going up. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you've got it all figured out?" "I think you need to tell us the truth," Michael shot back. "Richard deserves to know why you did this to him, why you took him away from his real family." Richard, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice low but steady. "Why, Emma? Why did you do it? What could possibly make you do something so horrible?" Emma's gaze flicked to Richard, and for the first time, something like guilt passed over her features. She looked away, her posture stiff and unyielding, but Michael could see the cracks beginning to form in her facade. "You wouldn't understand," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "Try us," Richard pressed, his tone demanding. Emma's shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of her secrets was finally becoming too much to bear. She turned away from them, staring out the window at the city below, her back to the room. "You were never supposed to find out," she said, her voice hollow. "None of this was supposed to come out." "Why, Emma?" Michael repeated, his voice softer now, but no less insistent. "Why did you do it?" There was a long pause, the tension in the room nearly unbearable. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice distant and cold. "I wanted control," she admitted, her tone devoid of emotion. "I wanted to be the one in charge. You were always so focused on your career, on your work. I was just an accessory to you, someone to show off at parties. I wanted more. I wanted the money, the power. And Lucas was the key to all of it. As long as he was in the picture, I would never have what I wanted." Michael felt a wave of nausea wash over him as her words sank in. "So, you had him taken? You had our son taken away because of your greed?" Emma turned to face them, her expression cold and unrepentant. "Yes, and I would do it again if I had to." Richard's face contorted with anger and disbelief. "You're a monster," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "You ruined our lives. You took everything from us." Emma's eyes hardened, any trace of guilt or remorse disappearing. "I did what I had to do, and now that you know the truth, what are you going to do about it? You think you can just waltz in here and ruin my life? You don't have the guts." Michael stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're going to pay for what you've done, Emma. I'll make sure of it." Emma laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you can scare me? You're nothing, Michael. You've always been nothing." But her words only strengthened Michael's resolve. He stepped closer to her, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. You're finished, Emma. This time, you won't get away with it." The room was thick with tension as Emma glared at him, her face twisted with rage. But beneath the bravado, Michael could see the fear in her eyes. She knew she was trapped, that her lies had finally caught up with her. Richard stood up, moving to stand beside his father. "We're done here," he said, his voice cold. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers." With that, they turned and walked out, leaving Emma standing alone in the center of the room, her world crumbling around her. As they stepped into the hallway, the weight of what they had just done began to settle in. It wasn't over yet. There would be legal battles, media attention, and a long road ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Michael felt a sense of closure. They had confronted the past, and now it was time to move forward. As they left the building, the cold air hitting their faces, Michael looked over at Richard. "You did well in there," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Richard nodded, though his expression was still troubled. "Thanks. I can't believe she did that. I can't believe she was capable of something so terrible." Michael sighed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes people do things we can't understand, but what matters now is that we know the truth, and we can start rebuilding our lives." Richard looked at his father, his expression softening. "Yeah, we can." As they walked away from the building, side by side, Michael felt a sense of hope stirring within him. The truth had come to light, and while it had been painful, it had also set them free. There was still a long road ahead, but they would face it together. And for the first time in years, Michael believed that they would be okay. The days following their confrontation with Emma were a whirlwind of activity. Michael and Richard, with the help of their legal team, began the process of bringing Emma to justice. The revelations of her involvement in Lucas's abduction, now Richard, had sent shockwaves through their circles, and the media quickly caught wind of the story. Emma's downfall was swift and public. The evidence against her was damning, and as more details emerged about her role in the conspiracy, it became clear that she had orchestrated the entire plan with cold precision. The legal proceedings moved quickly, and soon, Emma found herself facing serious criminal charges. For Michael, the legal battle was both exhausting and necessary. He attended every meeting with the lawyers, reviewed every piece of evidence, and ensured that no detail was overlooked. But as the days wore on, the weight of everything began to take its toll. The confrontation with Emma had brought a sense of closure, but it had also reopened old wounds, and the stress of the situation was beginning to wear on him. Richard, too, was struggling. The truth about Emma had shaken him to his core, and he found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, he was relieved to know the truth about his past, but on the other, he felt a deep sense of betrayal from someone he had once trusted. The process of reconciling these feelings was slow and painful. One evening, after a long day of meetings with the legal team, Michael and Richard returned to the hotel where they were staying. The city lights twinkled outside the window, casting a soft glow over the room as they sat down together, both feeling the weight of the day. Richard broke the silence first, his voice quiet. "I keep thinking about everything she did, everything she said. It's like I'm reliving it over and over in my head." Michael nodded, understanding the torment his son was going through. "I know. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. But we're doing the right thing, Richard. We're holding her accountable for what she did." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It just feels like, no matter what we do, it's not going to change what happened. We can't get those years back." Michael looked at him, his heart heavy with regret. "You're right. We can't change the past and we can't get those years back. But what we can do is move forward, together. We can make sure that she pays for what she did, and that she never hurts anyone else the way she hurt us." Richard nodded, though the pain in his eyes was still evident. "I know. It's just hard. I thought I had a normal life, that I knew who I was. And now, everything's different." Michael reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Richard's shoulder. "You're still the same person, Richard. Your past doesn't define who you are. You're strong, and you're resilient, and you've got your whole life ahead of you. We both do." Richard managed a small smile, appreciating his father's words, even though the pain still lingered. "Thanks, Dad. I guess I just need some time to figure it all out." "Take all the time you need," Michael said gently. "I'll be here, every step of the way." The following morning, they received a call from their lawyer, informing them that Emma's trial date had been set. The case had moved quickly, given the overwhelming evidence, and it was clear that Emma's fate was sealed. The trial would be a formality, a final step in ensuring that justice was served. On the day of the trial, Michael and Richard arrived at the courthouse, flanked by their legal team. The media presence was overwhelming, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions as they made their way inside. Michael kept a protective arm around Richard, shielding him from the onslaught as best he could. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Emma sat at the defense table, her once pristine appearance now worn and haggard. Gone was the poised, confident woman who had manipulated those around her. In her place was someone who had lost everything, her world crumbling beneath her feet. The trial proceeded swiftly, with witness testimonies and evidence presented in a methodical manner. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Emma's actions, leaving no doubt about her guilt. As the details of her involvement in Lucas's abduction were laid bare, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. When it was Michael's turn to testify, he took the stand with a steady resolve. He recounted the pain of losing his son, the years of searching, and the horror of discovering the truth about Emma's betrayal. His words were powerful, filled with the raw emotion of a father who had suffered unimaginable loss. Richard, too, took the stand, though his testimony was brief. He spoke of the life he had led, unaware of his true identity, and the shock of learning the truth. His voice trembled slightly, but he held himself with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes. As the trial neared its conclusion, the judge gave Emma one final opportunity to speak. She stood slowly, her expression defiant, though there was a hint of desperation in her eyes. "I regret nothing," Emma said, her voice cold and unrepentant. "I did what I had to do. If I had the chance, I'd do it all over again." Her words hung in the air, chilling in their lack of remorse. The courtroom was silent, everyone waiting for the judge's response. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the verdict. "Emma Carter, you have been found guilty of all charges. Your actions have caused irreparable harm to those around you, and you will be held accountable. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole." There was a collective sigh of relief in the courtroom as the sentence was handed down. Emma's expression didn't change, but the defeat in her eyes was unmistakable. The guards moved to take her away, and as she was led out of the courtroom, she cast one last glance at Michael and Richard. It was a look of pure venom, a final act of defiance. But Michael and Richard remained unmoved. They had won. Justice had been served, and Emma would never hurt them again. As they left the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, the city buzzing with life. Michael felt a sense of lightness that he hadn't experienced in years. The burden of the past had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, he could see a future filled with hope. Richard walked beside him, his expression thoughtful. "It's over," he said quietly, as if he could hardly believe it. "Yes," Michael agreed, his voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. "It's over." They walked in silence for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Then, Richard turned to his father, a small smile playing on his lips. "So, what now?" Michael smiled back, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. "Now, we move forward. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for, and I'm not going to waste a single moment." Richard nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "I'd like that." They continued walking, side by side, leaving the courthouse and the past behind them. The future was theirs to shape, and for the first time in years, it felt bright and full of promise. In the weeks following the trial, Michael and Richard settled into a new routine, one that was markedly different from the whirlwind of legal battles and emotional confrontations they had just endured. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet sense of peace, but also the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from the pieces that had been left behind. They returned to Switzerland, to the small town where Richard had grown up. It was a place where they could find some solace, away from the prying eyes of the media and the painful memories that lingered in New York. The town welcomed them back with open arms, its serene beauty providing a much-needed respite from the chaos they had faced. Michael had rented a small chalet not far from where Richard's adoptive family lived, giving them the space to rebuild their relationship while still allowing Richard the comfort of familiar surroundings. The days were simple, filled with long walks through the mountains, quiet dinners by the fire, and endless conversations as they got to know each other all over again. Richard was still grappling with the reality of his past, but each day brought a little more clarity. The anger and confusion that had clouded his mind were slowly giving way to acceptance, and with that acceptance came a sense of peace. He was beginning to understand that his life was not defined by the actions of others, but by the choices he made moving forward. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the chalet, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Richard turned to his father, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Dad," he began, the words still feeling new and a little strange on his tongue. "I've been thinking about what you said, that we need to move forward, and I think I'm ready to do that." Michael looked at him, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad to hear that, Richard. I know this hasn't been easy, but you've shown so much strength. I'm proud of you." Richard smiled, the first genuine smile Michael had seen in a long time. "Thanks, Dad. I've been thinking about what I want to do next, what kind of life I want to build now that I know the truth. And I think I want to do something meaningful, something that makes a difference." Michael nodded, understanding exactly what his son meant. "You're talking about helping others who've been through what you've been through, aren't you?" Richard's smile widened. "Yeah, I am. There are so many kids out there who've been lost, who've had their lives taken from them, just like I did. I want to help them, to give them the chance I had, to find their families, to rebuild their lives." Michael felt a surge of emotion as he listened to his son speak. "That's an incredible idea, Richard, and I'll support you every step of the way." Richard's eyes sparkled with determination. "I was thinking we could start a foundation, something that focuses on reuniting families and providing support for kids who've been through what I went through. We could call it the Lucas Foundation, after the name I was given at birth." Michael felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away, overwhelmed by his son's strength and compassion. "The Lucas Foundation," he repeated softly, letting the name sink in. "It's perfect, Richard. It's a way to honor who you were and who you've become." Richard nodded, his expression serious. "I want to turn all of this, everything we've been through, into something positive. I don't want anyone else to have to go through what we did." Michael reached over and took Richard's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm with you, Richard.